Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. U.S. President Donald Trump's second term is in full swing, and with his administration aggressively pushing to resolve the wars in Ukraine and Gaza while reprioritizing America's global commitments. Under the revived America First doctrine, traditional alliances are being redefined or tested. The U.S. ROK Alliance now stands at a critical juncture. South Korea is navigating a leadership transition, while the regional balance shifts due to deepening North Korea-Russia ties and heightened U.S.-China confrontation. Tariff threats, increased defense cost-sharing demands, and signals of a new approach towards North Korea raise urgent questions about the stability and future of the alliance. On Within the Frame today, we speak with Evans Revere, former U.S. Acting Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs and longtime Korea expert of force, to assess what lies ahead for the U.S. ROK Alliance in an increasingly volatile global order. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for coming on. So, Mr. Revere, it's been nearly 4 months since President Trump's second term has begun. And as you know, South Korea is actually at a leadership vacuum awaiting a snap election. As of now, how would you assess the current state of Washington's whole alliance?
I think it's helpful to look at where the alliance is in terms of how far it's come over the last 3 or 4 years. There have been tremendous strides in strengthening our partnership. There has been a resumption of the large-scale exercises, which means our troops are more ready and more capable than ever. There have been tremendous technological advances, new deployments, new systems in place, and all of that, I think, is good news. We have the Nuclear Consultative Group, which makes Korea a partner in the planning process in the event a nuclear crisis arises on the Korean Peninsula. I could go on about all the things that we've done together, but all of those things have made for an excellent and solid and close and cooperative alliance partnership. That's the good news. The uncertain news is that everyone in Korea, like many of us experts in the United States, have been watching what has transpired recently between the Trump administration and NATO and the EU, and the very difficult times that the U.S. transatlantic partnership with NATO countries and EU countries has been through. And I think that has created a bit of a shockwave among U.S. allies around the world, including here. I've been here for 2 or 3 days, and I've sensed that in all my conversations with people. People are watching with some level of concern, a pretty intense level of concern in many cases, about the implications of what has just happened in the U.S.-NATO alliance and that partnership, and the damage that has been done to that partnership. The shift in the U.S. policy approach towards allies and alliances, the very troubling rhetoric that we have heard from President Trump and others in the administration about allies and alliance partnerships. And I think people here are concerned about whether what has transpired in that transatlantic alliance relationship, what its implications are for Korea, and whether that wave of change and that wave of uncertainty that is now developed in that transatlantic partnership is now going to wash over Korea. And so the good news is the alliance has come a long way and is in a very solid place. But the not so good news is that people are filled with a level of anxiety about whether this partnership that we have now might be affected by the sorts of things that we've witnessed in U.S.-NATO relations.
Right. So in the past 4 months or so, like this uncertainty has been, growing.
Yes, but I delivered a talk a little bit earlier today, and I focused on 18 particular days in that period of February and March, peaking with President Zelensky's visit to the White House. I mean, for any American ally who was watching what happened in the White House that day in the Oval Office, that was a very troubling meeting. And things were said and accusations were made that really sent a shockwave through our alliance with our European partners. And I think it's sent a shockwave through our Asian partners as well.
Right. It was definitely a shift from the
Yeah.
previous administration. Now, as you've mentioned, the Trump administration has been, focusing on its resolutions to, end the wars in Ukraine and Gaza, and seemingly at the expense of, traditional alliances. Do you think this President Trump's I don't know how we will be able to refer to an anti-alliance stance. Do you think how it would negatively impact the relations between South Korea and the U.S.?
It has the potential to do that. Let's hope it doesn't. I describe President Trump as an alliance skeptic, but he has indeed used some fairly strong words to criticize our Korean alliance partners. But he's also used similar terms to talk about Japan. And we're all familiar with the very difficult things that he's had to say about our European allies, and some of them, pretty blunt criticisms of our European partners. All of this has the potential to spill over into the U.S. ROK Alliance relationship. I hope it does not. But I don't see any reason why an American president who holds the views that he does, as strongly as he does vis-a-vis our European partners, is not going to have a similar set of views with respect to our Asian partners, including the Republic of Korea. And for some reason, he has a particular level of animus towards Korea. I don't know whether there was a failed business deal or something, I'm not sure. But the fact is that he has, on more than one occasion, questioned the usefulness of our forces here in Korea, and said some pretty specific things about the U.S. ROK Alliance that were not necessarily very positive. And then there's, of course, the election coming up. And the election, particularly if the progressive camp wins, there is some potential on a number of issue areas, including relations with China, relations with Japan, burden sharing, a number of things in which we might find Washington and Seoul not necessarily on the same page. That's happened several times over the decades, but speaking as someone who was a participant in a lot of that diplomacy, we always managed to get things fixed, because at the end of the day, you always had leaders in Seoul and in Washington who believed very strongly in the alliance. That may not be the case today, and that is what troubles me. And based on my conversations here in Seoul, it's something that is troubling a lot of other people as well.
Right. Now, in light of his so-called anti-alliance posture, Mr. Revere, what kind of diplomatic tools do you think South Korea would be able to use to, take the lead or, redefine or reinforce the ROK-U.S. alliance?
The ROK is, I think, well positioned to make an incredibly strong case of why Korea is arguably the best ally that we have, not only in the Asia-Pacific region, but around the world. You have the incredible number of troops and forces and capabilities that the ROK deploys. You have the pivotal role that the ROK plays in defending the Korean Peninsula. We play a supporting role, but it's the ROK that bears the bulk of the burden in doing so, and would do so in a wartime scenario as well. You have an incredible level of technology that America is probably eager to get access to. There are shipbuilding and ship repair capabilities that the Republic of Korea has that the United States could draw upon. And so the point that I make to my friends here in Seoul is, if it hasn't been done already, it's incumbent on the current government and the incoming government to basically put together a list of all of the advantages that South Korea brings to the table in its partnership with the United States, and to be able to make that case to a somewhat skeptical American president. The President of the United States is on record as saying that allies are out to get us, and he doesn't trust allies. Well, South Korea is in a great position to make the case of why South Korea is so important to peace and stability in East and Northeast Asia, and why the Republic of Korea is so vital a partner for the United States as the U.S. pursues its own regional and global security interests. So that's the homework, I think, for the current administration and the incoming administration, whichever it may be. And I'm sure there are very, very good people, I know many of them, who are working on these things even as we speak.
Right. So since he wants this kind of transactional approach, so we would really have to work to provide why South Korea is actually beneficial in the alliance part. Now we've touched upon this a while ago, but compared to the Biden administration, where this whole Washington-Tokyo Trilateral Alliance was very kind of strong. There has been, growing uncertainties about this as well under the Trump administration. What's your outlook on the Trilateral Alliance moving forward?
I should have included that in my list in response to your first question, because one of the most remarkable accomplishments of the last several years is the formation of that partnership among Seoul, Tokyo, and Washington. I've been working on both of those alliance partnerships for longer than I care to remember. It's been a long time. And that was always the goal, was to be able to form a cooperative partnership, to form a tactical as well as a strategic partnership among the three, to increase the transparency in our planning process, to work together. And all of that's been done. And it's wonderful. It's still in its fairly early stages, but it has functioned extremely well since the time it was put together. To allow that to deteriorate or to erode would be a real tragedy, I think, for everyone involved. And so there is some potential that erosion might just happen. I would dare say there is a greater danger from the ROK side of the partnership than from the U.S. side of the partnership, mainly because of the history, the unfortunate history of relations between Tokyo and Seoul. But I was encouraged to see candidate Lee Jae-myung say some positive things about the Japan partnership yesterday. I certainly hope that if he is elected, he would follow through on the comments that he and some of his advisors have made about that. I often say to my Japanese friends, you can't defend Japan without a strong relationship with Korea. And I say to my Korean friends, you can't defend Korea without a strong relationship with Japan and the bases that provide such critical support in the rear area in the event of a contingency on this peninsula. It's a natural partnership among the three. We ought to keep that in play. We ought to keep moving and building on that if we can.
Right. So if South Korea and Japan maintains its current ties, then the Trump administration's stance on the Trilateral Alliance would be similar.
I can't speak for Donald Trump.
Of course.
I do have a sense, talking to my colleagues at the State Department and the Defense Department and the NSC and other branches of the U.S. government, they would certainly want this to continue. One of the difficulties that we're all having as we go through this transition into this new administration is that you have a two-headed U.S. government. You have an American president who has his own very strong views on a lot of issues, and then you have the usual elements of the United States national security bureaucracy who are doing what they usually do, which is to provide reassurance and cooperation and support for our allies. And the two of them don't always connect at all points, and that makes things a bit complicated for us.
Right, so we'll have to see. Now, let's also touch upon North Korea, Mr. Revere. There's been speculation that if President Trump succeeds in brokering a ceasefire with Ukraine, he would shift to North Korea now. And in your previous interview, we saw that you've expressed concern over possibilities for Trump pursuing arms control dialogue with North Korea. Could you elaborate on that concern?
Yeah, 13 years ago, I was part of a fascinating conversation with the then North Korean Foreign Minister Ri Yong-ho in New York. And he said two remarkable things that really struck everybody in the room at the time. He said that denuclearization was unlikely to happen anytime soon. That came as no surprise. But he also said that if the United States would remove its threat, and he then, at my request, identified what the threat was, and I'll get that in just a second, but he said, if you would remove your threat, we would feel more at ease, and then in 10 or 20 years, we could consider denuclearization. And he defined the threat as the U.S. ROK Alliance, the presence of U.S. forces in Korea, and the U.S. tactical and strategic weapons that target North Korea in the event of a conflict. So remove those things, he said, and we can think about denuclearization. That was the first thing he said. But the second thing he said built on that. And he said, in the meantime, we can have a dialogue as one nuclear power with another, and we can even talk about arms control. All of us in the room were quite stunned at what we heard that day, because he basically laid out the agenda for North Korea that still holds to this day. That is a conversation the North Koreans want to have about arms control, because it would enable them to do what they've often done in the past, which is to make insincere and false promises in return for benefits that they would get from us. And in this case, they would demand that those three things that I mentioned, the alliance, U.S. forces, and strategic and tactical weapons, would be on the negotiating table. And their goal in that dialogue would be to undercut the alliance, weaken the strength of the alliance, weaken the U.S. commitment, and basically get an acknowledgement from the United States that North Korea is a full-fledged nuclear power, which is something that they have sought for a long time. So for all of those reasons, I have been telling my colleagues who advocate this, be careful, because this potentially could have us walking into a negotiating trap with the North Koreans that would yield nothing but empty promises and would have us put things on the table that we ought never to put on the table in a dialogue with North Korea.
Wow, so it's a very dangerous.
In my view, yeah.
So, right. So merely just engaging in that dialogue would show that, you know, we're acknowledging them as a nuclear state.
It would indicate an acceptance of them as a nuclear dialogue partner. Now, that's not the same as saying that they are a nuclear weapon state within the meaning of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Heavens, we should never do that. But it would give them a certain gravitas and credibility as a nuclear power.
Now, let's also touch upon President Trump's pressuring of NATO allies to raise defense spending to about 5% of the GDP. Mr. Revere, what implications does this hold, you know, this version of America First policy have for the framework against the North Korea's nuclear threat?
It's one thing to urge allies and partners to raise their defense spending and to every 3, 4, 5 years, however often these dialogues take place, to put that on the table and urge them to do that. Every president has done that since time immemorial. But it's a very different thing to say, as President Trump has, that America expects to be paid for the defense and security services that it provides its allies. That has left our allies very shocked and confused, because no American president has ever said anything like that before. I'd like to think that he has misspoken, but a dialogue to strengthen defense spending, to increase defense spending, to increase burden sharing payment, that's a normal thing. And we just had one of those, and it succeeded, and everyone was happy. I would hope that we would not reopen that. But I'm afraid that we may, and that will cause, I think, some difficulties between Washington and Seoul, and I hope we can avoid that if at all possible.
Let's hope for that. Now, with North Korea, of course, and Russia growing closer and closer, and U.S. ROK relations entering a period of transition under the Trump administration, and U.S.-China confrontation also intensifying. And South Korea, of course, is, you know, awaiting a new administration coming in. How do you think the new administration, what efforts do you think they should make to, you know, strengthen its diplomatic and security capabilities?
Well, I think keeping the alliance as strong and as capable as possible. I think increasing ROK capabilities. Making sure that all of the things that the ROK has undertaken to do to strengthen its capabilities in the various dialogues that the United States and South Korea have been having in recent years, those are all essential and should go forward. At the same time, I think it's very helpful and important, essential, for South Korea to remember that the last country to invade the Korean Peninsula was the PRC in 1950, and that the PRC is a treaty ally of North Korea, and that for those reasons and more, South Korea needs to keep its eye on the ball in terms of the danger that China and the China-North Korea relationship, and now the China-North Korea-Russia relationship, poses to the Korean Peninsula. And doing so, I think, will be welcomed by any U.S. administration, including this one.
Would you like to highlight one specific, one most important thing that we would expect for the South Korean next government to,
The one thing would be that the opposition party, if the opposition party wins, has some views about alliance management, burden sharing, Japan, Russia, Ukraine, and China that don't necessarily accord with those in Washington. We need to try to make sure that we manage the differences between us as well as we've managed them in the past, because at this very critical juncture in history, not being able to manage those things could result in some potential ruptures in the alliance, and we want to avoid that at all costs.
Right. So even though we have differences in interests, we should be able to manage them very
I should hope so.
Wisely, of course. Now, Mr. Revere, we'll have to conclude our discussion at this point. Thank you so much for making time for us.
Thank you for having me. Wonderful.
Thank you. And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.